Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Hanson Place Seventh-day Adventist Church Youth Ministries Department, I want to welcome you to our program this afternoon, Defining the Decade. I'm your host, Hugh S.V. Carrington, and I'm joined this afternoon by three young, talented individuals. One of them is going to join us in a short while, Pastor Marshall. But we want to begin this afternoon with this program, Defining the Decade. The decade being 2020 to 2030. And so we're looking at the next 10 years, the future. But before we look forward, I want us to assess how did we get here, where we are today, 2020. Injustice, racism, systemic racism that has been around for a period of time. And so I want each of our panel this afternoon to introduce themselves, and then I want you to reflect on that particular question. How did we get here? If you can, for us. And we'll begin with Jamiki.
Hi, my name is Jamiki. Glad to be here. When I think about how we got here, I think about mainly my parents, where they've come from and how I was brought up and how I'm here. I think of years of oppression that has happened. I think of people that have made positive influences in my life and negative ones, and how I choose to grow from those circumstances. I think about the institutions that I was raised in, education, and even the church. I think about all of that and how all of that just has an influence on my life and how I choose to live. So I think in general, it's just a big umbrella of how we got here, what we choose to take from what we see every day, and how we choose to grow from that.
All right, thank you. And we'll go now to Jamel. We're looking forward. We're going to look at this decade. We're going to try to define it 2020 to 2030. But before we go forward, how do we get here? Here we are today, as we said, injustice, racism. Tell me, introduce yourself and tell us how do we get here?
Hi, my name is Jamel from Brooklyn with these guys. How do we get here? Through practice, through years and years, decades, centuries of practicing how to do what is wrong, and allowing people who have power to abuse power as well, and just rehearsing this and having this being our expectations throughout life. We expect things like this to happen in one way or form, whether it's through race or through money, through whatever system is in charge. We practice it, we rehearse it, and we follow through with the routine.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. It's great to have you guys here with us. And as we said, we're looking at this topic, defined in the decade. So we have one bookend, and the one bookend is 2020. And you've shared a little bit with us of how we got here, as Jamiki is saying, through these institutions. And as Jamel is saying, through bad practices of being wrong, of practicing injustice for all these years. But so we have that one bookend. Now I want us to look forward. I want us to look forward. What does 2030 look like for us? Are we still marching and protesting? What is your desire as a young individual today in our society? What does 2020, what are you hoping for? What are we going to do? Are we still marching? Are we still protesting? Tell me now, what does 2030 look like?
So, okay, I'll go first.
Yes.
So 2030 for me, I'm hoping that it is more of a utopia. I know that we can't have plain peace across the board, but I am hoping that it's a little bit more peaceful than where we are right now. I'm hoping that through all of this, Black voices are heard. They're allowed into the spaces that they weren't allowed before, or just it's not made to look like Black people are just allowed into those spaces, but they actually are in those spaces. Board of directors, they look more colorful across the board.
Okay.
As far as like businesses and enterprises go, I hope that we can definitely see more Black and brown faces there as well. I'm looking for at least some form of reparations to happen by that time, for us to at least, even if they're not given out by that time, to at least have a plan, a contract plan to work with in 2030. So yeah, that's what my 2030 looks like right now.
All right, Pastor Marshall, thank you for joining us. We just began, and so we're looking at this first question. We want to go back and have you introduce yourself and tell us how did we get here? We're talking about racism, social injustice, systemic racism that has been around for a period of time. So I want you to tell us, how did we get here? Introduce yourself and tell us, how did we get here?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Carrington. As Dr. Carrington said, my name is Pastor Corey Marshall. I'm the assistant pastor at the Ephesus Church in Harlem. And I believe the reason that we got here was because a lot of the issues that you just identified, Dr. Carrington, they were not addressed appropriately. And it took someone losing their life for everyone to recognize that this is a serious issue that we need to address at this juncture before it escalates into something that cannot be further addressed appropriately.
All right, thank you. And then the next question we're dealing with, we're going to come back to you. We're going to go to Jamel so he can answer this particular question. We have the one bookend now of how do we get here 2020. We have the other bookend, which will be 2030, this decade. And the question we want to answer now, Jamel, and then we're going to come back to you, Pastor Marshall, is what does 2030 look like? Are we still marching? Are we still protesting? What does it look like? What is your desires? We heard from Jamiki, we want to see more representation, not just figuratively, but we want to see it in reality. That's what she's looking for by 2030. Jamel, what are you looking for? And then we're going to come to Pastor Marshall.
All right. Well, I'm not as optimistic as Jamiki. I know she said she believes in a utopia, but I don't believe there'll be a utopia anytime while we're here on earth, until Christ comes, until there's a new heaven and a new earth. Then there'll be a utopia. In the meantime, there's always going to be issues that needs to be addressed. That we're never going to achieve a perfection of equality. We're always going to have to protest. We're always going to have to speak up for ourselves, and we're always going to have to do our part. Will people change? That's hard to say. That's an individual thing. You know, God has to reach each individual heart. You know, we can make laws. If laws are made, you can't force people to adhere to it. If policies are changed, you can't force people to adhere to it. All we can do is tell people about Christ, let Christ change the heart, and we have laws, so all we can do is hold people accountable to the laws to the best of our ability. The laws that already exist on the books.
All right, and Pastor Marshall, what does 2030 look like for you? What are your desires? Are we still marching? Are we still protesting? Are we still dealing with some of these same issues?
By 2030, hopefully, we are not marching as much. By 2030, the hope is that we will start to hold people, or not start, but rather continue to hold people accountable. As Jamel said, the laws change, but people tend to remain the same. But the individuals that are in power, the individuals that we vote for, the individuals that are given the authority to help govern the affairs of humanity and mankind, all we can pray and hope is that we continue to hold those individuals accountable, so that justice is something that is being seen not just in one area of life where Black lives or minorities are concerned, but in regards to all people.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So now we have these two bookends. We have 2020. We talked a little bit about how we got here. We have 2030, this decade, these 10 years is going to go past, and what our visions, our hopes, our aspirations are as far as race relationships and justice in our society. But now we got to deal with the 10 years. And so let's dig in now and deal a little bit with these 10 years in between. And I want to begin, there's this whole concept of we have to know who we are. We have to know what we're doing. And we got to know why we're doing why we're doing it. And if we know our why, it helps us to do our what a little bit better. And then this whole concept of how do we actually do it. The how we're going to deal with a little bit later. But right now, I want us to focus on this particular question. Who are we? You know, who are we going to be in these 10 years? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? Talk to me, Jamel. Who are we? And tell me who we are. Tell me why we're doing what we're doing, and what are we doing?
You mean we as a church?
Who are we? Is it the church that's doing this? Is it the individual? Is it the Black community? Is it the LGBT with everyone? Who are we? Do we know who?
If that's the case, then you have different responsibilities. As a church, there's one responsibility, and as an individual, you have another responsibility. You know, as a church, the church is not primarily focused on social reform because it's a religious group. But as an individual, you can go out and you can help people. I think that's an individual responsibility. If I see someone who's struggling, I don't have to say, hey, church, can you help this person? I see the person struggling. I should help the person. That's my responsibility. I think the church has a different focus, a different emphasis. Not to say the church can help or shouldn't help, but that the emphasis for our particular organization is a religious emphasis. And individuals have a different responsibility. In addition to religion, we have the responsibility to help those in need and to speak out on those issues. So I think.
So do I leave my protesting for injustice, for equality at home when I come to church? Do I leave that desires at home?
So if you're going to go out and protest the change of laws, I think that's more of a different organization rather than a religious organization. I don't think religious groups should primarily focus on changing laws, because if different religious groups have different values on those laws. But as an individual, we can do those type of things. We can go out to the government and say, hey, blah, 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 blah. Me and my friends say this. But I can't go on behalf of the church and say that. Based on what? Based on the Bible? If that makes sense to you guys. Should
okay.
I?
All right. So Jamiki, talk to me. Who are we? Who is looking for this justice, this equality in our society? Do we know who we are?
I think that is the issue. We don't know who we are.
We don't.
We don't know who we are. I think when you are in a position of power, your first and foremost responsibility should be to speak up for those people that do not have that same power or same privilege as you. That's what you should do with that power. I think as a large organization as the church, they have a responsibility to do so. They have a responsibility to pick up and say, you know what, these are our people that are part of our organization that are affected by these problems, and we need to go out and we need to do something. Do I think that we need to be out there as a church protesting every week? I don't. But
Okay.
I do think that if the church is supposed to be a hospital, and if we have the ability to help while there is a protest going on, for example, when they were doing tear gassing individuals during the protest, we had a great opportunity as a church to open up our doors and say, you know what, we have an abundance of nurses here. Let's take you in. Let's be able to help in that way. We don't necessarily need you out here also calling police officers out of their name or being disrespectful to that extent. But yes, your voice matters. And there are other ways that we can help. But I do think to separate the two, that's me questioning. Part of my identity is the fact that I am Christian. So I can't separate the two. I can't say this is an individual problem and this is a church problem.
Okay. Pastor Marshall, talk to me a little bit. Do we know who we are? What we're going to talk about this a little bit more. What are we doing and why? But do we know who we are? Who are we that's trying to achieve this, break down these walls, etc.?
I think we have lost sight of who we are. When you look at Adventism in its early stages, they were very much involved in social justice and social reform. There is a book written by Ellen G. White called The Southern Work, and she is constantly speaking against the treatment of Blacks during that time or during that period in history. And we have other instances where we see the church being involved in social reform, such as the Chicago initiatives that were headed by Kellogg. So I think we have lost sight of who we are, and I think that we also need to bring that back into balance. We as an Adventist church, we are a prophetic movement, and prophecy is not just proclamation from the pulpit. Prophecy, especially if you read the minor prophets, is getting engaged and involved with what's taking place in the community against the people of God. Because just because a group of people don't belong to the denomination doesn't mean that they are not the people of God. So I do think that the church can be involved in some of the issues taking place in our community. Here's why. Our church needs to be involved because our evangelistic witness will be impacted by the issues taking place in the community. So there definitely needs to be a balance that needs to be brought into perspective, and we need to do so. We need to integrate ourselves into what's going on in a way that does not prevent us from carrying out our mission as spoken about in Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 to 20, which is the Great Commission. So we definitely do need to be involved because it will impact our witness, because we don't want people, obviously, to say that the only time we see you is when you have an event going on. We want to be present at those community board meetings. We want to be present at those police meetings that they're having in our community. We want to have relationships with our community representatives and the people that are voted in to represent us.
Okay. All right. So, and let me shift now very quickly and deal with this other concept here of why. Why are we doing what we're doing? Because again, if we know our why, then it impacts what we do. And so talk to me a little bit about that. Jamiki, do we know why we're doing what we're doing? Do we know why we are striving for equality and striving to break down these barriers of racism, injustice, etc. in our society?
Okay. I think our why is because we don't like what we are currently seeing. I don't like turning on the news. I don't like scrolling on social media and every other post is about another Black person that was killed, not just by police officers, but by just any hate crime. And that's for Black people across the board, no matter what you believe in, no matter who you choose to love, all of it. So my why right now is that I just want Black people aren't even asking for equality at this point. Like, they're just asking to not be harmed, like to be able to step outside of their house and not to be afraid, to be able to be stopped by a police officer, regardless if it's warranted or not, and just know that they are going to make it home and not have to worry about that. And I think that's where my why stems from. Okay. So just to level the playing field, even like slightly, that would help.
All right. And Jamel, talk to me. Why are we doing what we're doing?
Well, when you see people hurting, you love people. You don't want to see that. Like, you want people to be treated fair. I want to be treated fairly myself. And I want Jamiki to be treated fairly. I want Corey, I want you to be treated fairly. And I want that for everyone. And we, as an organization, we want everyone to be treated the same. Everyone should be on the same playing field across the board. We know how God views everyone. He doesn't separate us in the categories that we separate each other. He views us as a human race, and we should do that for each other as well. And it's not fair. So that's the reason why we oppose those things. It's because we love people.
Pastor Marshall?
We do it because it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
I think that what will put it into perspective is if we ask the question, if we were white instead of Black, would we still feel the same way? And I think we're doing it because we don't want to just be treated equally. We want to make sure that we all have equity, meaning that we all have a fighting chance to sit at the table, have our voices heard, and make sure that we are validated and we feel appreciated. Because when you stop and you think about the history of this country, we helped to build this country, and that should be acknowledged. And people should take those things into consideration, especially as we are fighting just to have a chance to live out the best quality of life that we can possibly live.
Okay, and so now that we know why we're doing what we're doing, as we said, it's a right thing to do. I love my brother or sister, and so equity, reducing, removing racism, etc., is important for every aspect of what we're trying to do. The question is, and this is a quickly yes or no answer. What are we doing? Are we doing the right things? Yes or no, very quickly, because I want to move on to something that's going to be a little bit more interesting. So, what are we doing? Are we doing the right things? Pastor Marshall, are we doing the right things? Yes or no? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Jamiki, are we doing the right things?
No.
No. All right. Okay, we're going to hear a little bit more. Jamel, are we doing the right things? No. All right. Okay. So we're going to hold on to those. I want us to go now and begin to look at this particular question. What's the role of the Christian? Not the church, of the Christian. We can talk about the church as a whole. Of course, we're going to bring that in. We're Christians, and so we attend church. But what is the role of the Christian? And I'll begin by making this statement. Can you can't, it's not a question, you can't abandon your Christianity to gain anything. What does that mean to you as a Christian in this fight? You can't abandon your Christianity to gain anything. Pastor Marshall, let's begin with you.
I think it means that you can't divorce yourself from your Christian principles.
Okay.
If you are going to stand up and represent a cause, essentially that cause has to be in line with what you believe in as a Christian.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Jamiki?
I agree with Pastor Marshall. It goes back to kind of what I said before about the individual and being Christian. Like, that's part of your identity. So you can't kind of choose one without the other. That's kind of like you forsaking yourself.
All right. Okay. And Jamel, you can't abandon your Christianity to gain anything. What does that mean to you when we look at this concept of the role of the Christian in social justice?
Well, they said it all. You can't compromise your principles. You can't compromise the Bible's principles to gain favor with other people or anyone else.
Okay. So that same Bible that we're referring to have some amazing passages on how do we fight with evil and deal with inequality and these things in our society. And I'll begin with this one. It says, if my people, which are called by my name, we all know it, will humble themselves and pray. It says, he says eventually, I will heal their land. And then it's another passage in Ephesians that says, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and rulers and powers in dark places. And so how does a Christian deal with that when we're saying, God, if I pray, you're telling me you're going to heal my land? How do I deal with this as a Christian when you're telling me to march and you're telling me to protest and you're telling me to call my senator and call my representative, but here the Bible is saying to me, I'll heal your land. This is not flesh and blood. Jamiki, how do we deal with this? How do we reconcile this?
If you don't mind, Dr. Carrington, if I could just step in for a minute, because I think she's having a technical issue.
Okay, go ahead.
I think the way that we reconcile this is by first of all understanding that passage in its context.
Okay.
When we read 2 Chronicles chapter 7 and verse 14, which I believe you're referring to, God is talking about those individuals returning to him just in case they sin, and he brings judgment upon them, and God restoring them as a result of that. So first of all, we need to understand that passage in its complete context. It sounds nice, but God's actually saying that as a means of of emphasizing redemption. The other part of that is recognizing I'll use the standpoint of Samson just for a second. When we look at Samson and he's standing between the pillars and he's praying to God and he's asking God to avenge him for his 2 eyes that he lost, the first thing he does is pray. And then after he prays, he pushes. So he engages in a spiritual discipline, but he actively becomes involved. So it has to be God plus us, and then we receive the power to do what we endeavor to do in fighting in those principalities and those powers and spiritual wickedness.
All right. Okay. Excellent. Jamel, talk to me a little bit. We're saying the Christian role in all of this. You're telling me to march. You're telling me to do these things, but the Bible is saying to me, I'll heal your land if you pray. Or you're fighting not against flesh and blood. Stop fighting with each other. This is a war you're not going to win. How does a Christian deal with this?
Well, there are a lot of promises in the Bible that God gives to people, and the people claim it, and God delivers on those promises. So you have promises that God gave to Abraham, right? That Abraham couldn't achieve on his own. God delivered on those promises. You have 3 Hebrews who went to a fiery furnace, but God promised in Isaiah 43, I believe, that he will be with us when we're in the fire. And Jesus himself was with them in the fire. They couldn't do that. Only God could do that. Daniel, in Psalms 22, God said he will close the mouth of the lion. Daniel couldn't close the mouth of lions, so he had to claim the promises. And people claim, and you see Jesus healing people. They're claiming the promises. God himself is doing those works. He's doing things that we're not capable of. We can't inherit the promise. He delivers us through his word. He just says so, and it becomes a reality when we trust him. And that's the way we overcome in real life. That's a real life situation. And it's also the means of salvation. He promises to save us, and when we trust him to save us, he will save us. So we have to claim it. If he says he's going to heal the land, then he's going to heal the land. We just have to claim it. If he's going to do something, he will do it if we allow him to do it.
So, but the question remains, do I still march and protest while I'm waiting on him to heal the land?
It depends on what you're protesting. If you're protesting something that's in line with the Bible, with the principles of the Bible, if you're a Protestant reformer, for example, they protest. If that's in line with the Bible, then by all means protest. If what you're protesting and the principles that you're protesting is in line with the Bible, then it's fine. If it's not, then you gotta, go back and correct yourself and correct the protest, if that makes sense.
Yes. Jamiki seems to be having some technical difficulties. Hopefully she'll be able to, here she is. She's back. All right. So Jamiki, let's talk a little bit about this whole concept of the Christian's role in this process. And, the Bible says, I'll heal your land. And so am I praying and sitting around for God to heal the land? He also talks about you're fighting not against flesh and blood. So why are we fighting with each other? Do I, as a Christian, do what I need to do and let God do his thing? Or what's my role? What am I doing in all of this?
I think your role is to be present in your community. If that means that you're doing all that you can do for your community. So if that means that you're showing up and the most you can do is to say a little prayer for your neighbor, then you do that. If the most that you can do is donate some money to any protest or any organization that you feel you've done the research and you see that they've been helping or they want to help and it's going in the right direction, then you do that as well. But your most important role is to show up. Like I said, you don't necessarily if you are not comfortable protesting, I don't suggest you go out there and protest, because there are a lot of people that have been putting their life out on the line each and every week that they go out there to protest, and it's dangerous. It honestly is. But I do think as a Christian, we have a responsibility to not stay quiet. That doesn't help anybody. People look, if they know to have power, they look to you. So they want to make sure that, they're being seen, that their voices are being heard. Like personally, I know I wouldn't want to be a part of an organization that does not speak up when I'm hurting, when my people are hurting. I need someone when I don't have courage to be the voice for myself. I feel the need to be a part of an organization that will speak up on my behalf. So the most important thing is to just show up. And even if that means you showing up and staying silent and just showing that you are there to support, then you're doing the most that you can do.
So can justice and equality be achieved on this side of eternity?
I don't think so. I think that the Christian walk is a hard one. This is just kind of one of those things that we have to go through. I do think with speaking up that we will be able to make our circumstances a little better, but I don't think that utopia that I was talking about, I don't think that will be seen on this side of eternity. The promise was made that our land will eventually get to that place. But that will take time, and we see that the promise is when, New Jerusalem and all of that, that's when we're going to see that. But until then, people definitely assume that the Christian walk is I've accepted the Lord and now everything is going to be smooth sailing. And that's not what the case is at all. So my answer is no.
All right, Jamel, talk to me a little bit about that. Because you've been shaking your head, can justice and equality be achieved on this side of eternity?
No, not on this side of eternity. And we know that worse things are going to happen. Okay. We know that there's going to be an entire persecution that's going to happen against God's people. We know devastation is going to happen. We have these in the Bible. We have the prophetic gift. We know that bad things will happen. But in the meantime, as these bad things happen, you don't do nothing. Because what the solutions are, you have to bring them, show them Christ. Christ is the solution. So you are helping people as well in a physical sense, but you're helping them more importantly in a spiritual aspect. That will guard them. If we know that there's 7 last plagues coming, how do you get deliverance from them? Well, again, like I said earlier, you trust in God's promises, just as Israel. Israel didn't stop plagues in Egypt. You have to trust God. And I know that it sounds kind of like a cop-out to a lot of people, just trust God, but it really is that serious. When you trust him, if he can physically heal you, right? He can spiritually heal you as well. We know that the nations of the world, that God allows them a certain amount of time to rule. He allows them to do the works, and he gives them a chance, and then he judges them on his own time. All right? So at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, even as much as we speak out against it, which we should speak out against evil, at the end of the day, we have to rely and wait for God to finish the work. And that'll happen on the other end of it.
All right, Pastor Marshall, you're a trained minister of the gospel. And you know, you've been trained to tell folks that they're going to heaven and it's going to be great when we get there and all of this.
I lost you for a second, bro. I think you're muted. In the meantime, I think what I can say is I heard both Jamiki and Jamel, and there were elements of what you both said that I agree with, and elements that I didn't disagree with. I don't think that we'll ever find holistic justice, but I do think in some areas of our communities and of our world that we will be able to find justice. In light of the death of George Floyd, you see a lot of legislation, especially in New York, being developed to protect not just African Americans, but people in general. You hear people protesting to defund the police and making sure that those resources are being used to build up our communities. So I think we see a step in the right direction. We see people in authority being held accountable. But at the same time, we reconcile that by recognizing that not every problem on this planet will be solved until Jesus comes. If we completely say, respectfully, if we completely say that no, it won't be, what hope do we give the person that we hope to lead to Christ? Because if Christ is supposed to be the answer to our problems or the answer to what's happening in the world around us, and he can't even solve that, what would attract me to want to be a part of a body of believers who don't believe that in this life? Because that's what we have to deal with. We have to deal with the issues in this life to be a part of this group.
All right. So let's deal with this issue a little bit further as we try to wrap up this particular question, the role of the Christian in all of this. Some individuals will say that racism and injustice are not the real problem. And they will say racism and injustice is a symptom of the true problem, and the true problem is sin. And so if the true problem, if you agree with that the true problem is sin, why am I marching? Why am I protesting? Why am I doing all of these things? If I'm not going to achieve, justice and equality on this side of eternity, am I really dealing with the real problem? What do you say to that, Jamiki?
We know that sin will continue to be a problem until the Lord's return. I hate to say it, but it's a matter of how we deal with it at this point. What we need to do in our Christian walk to make us feel better, to make us feel like we're not sitting stagnant and that we're actually making some moves, because it's very easy. We see it constantly when we tell people to go out and vote. We constantly say you cannot change your situation if you sit there and you just decide to not do anything, but you can get online and say, this is the problem. And we have solutions by electing officials that can possibly make your situation a little bit better. We know that sin is the problem. We're very aware that sin is the problem, but there are certain things that affect us personally. And if we feel the need to go out and protest or to go out and suggest changes, then I think we kind of have the right to do so. We're oppressed. We are an oppressed people. Racism is one of just those oppressions. And we kind of, people categorize it into like different groups, into subgroups. So now with racism, we have our internal form of racism, which is colorism. And we continue to oppress ourselves by believing these things. And it's kind of hard to just say, like, let's sit back and let's, not do anything because this is sin. And we know sin isn't going to be kaput until the Lord comes back. So I can't feel comfortable saying, let's just do that. Let's just stay still and just let things happen, or just let things work out the way that they're supposed to. I don't feel comfortable saying that.
And so Pastor Marshall, let me go to you, then I'm coming to you, Jamel. So let me pose the question to you a little bit differently, because I think I know what your answer is going to be, that yes, we all know that sin is the problem. So how do we equate? How much time do I spend? How much time do you spend as a minister dealing with the spiritual aspect of it, the sin? And how much time do you spend dealing with the practical aspect of it, which is laws, legislation, protesting, etc.? Is there a balance in this?
Yeah, there has to be a balance, but I think that we've been looking at it from the wrong perspective. I think we have to utilize the PEMDAS approach, or order of operations. And when we look at Jesus, what Jesus did was deal with the practical issue first, and use that as a segue into dealing with the spiritual issue. I think that as Christians, sometimes we often do the inverse of that, and that prevents us from making progress and being successful and leading the charge where change is concerned. Because when we look at the history of the church, especially at my church, Ephesus has a very rich history. It was involved in a lot of social initiatives. R.T. Hudson, Strahan, I can't remember the first pastor's name, but when it was all said and done, a part of their work was not just addressing sin, but leading their people toward actively becoming involved in change. And that's where we have to begin in order for people to see our witness through our protests.
All right, Jamel, anything to add here? Looking at this issue of, we're really not dealing with the problem. The root of the problem is sin. And if you're not dealing with that, then all equality and justice is going to remain. What are we doing? Talk to me.
Well, yes, sin is absolutely the cause of the problem. It's the cause of all the problems. And that is the main thing that we should always address, for sure. No one's going to argue with that. No Christian is going to argue with that. But if you go to the doctor and the doctor says you have a problem, you don't eat right and exercise, your whole lifestyle is a problem, he might give you a prescription first, right? And tell you, take this, but also as you're taking this prescription, work out, go to the gym, eat fruits and vegetables, drink some water, get some sunlight. If you call a mechanic and you say something's wrong with my car, the tires are flat, or something's happening in the car, he'll look at the cause of the problem, but in the meantime, he'll do some things to help you get back on the road, maybe. So it depends on the situation. You can't just put it across the board and say, well, sin is up, so I don't need to give you any help in regards to your physical, temporal needs. You help people according to those situations. Each situation is unique, and you help people as you can. But the end goal, of course, is ultimately to address the sin, and that is by introducing them to Christ, because he's the only true solution to the cause of the problem. But put a Band-Aid on the scrape. Do a little bit that you can.
All right. Let's shift gears a little bit and begin to, because we're wrapping up. We're running out of time. A lot of us now in our society, we want to dismantle, we want to defund, we want to destroy a lot of things. So the question that I want to raise to us is, what do we replace these things with? What do I mean by that? Is anytime you remove anything, if you don't fill it, a void is left. And the void might be filled with something that you do not want it filled with. And so you have to be very proactive, and we're going to get to that in a second. And so if we want to dismantle, for example, white theology, do we replace it with black theology, or do we leave it blank and let something else fill it? We want to replace or dismantle, destroy racism. But are we going to leave it blank, or is it going to be filled with classism and colorism and nationalism? We want to dismantle, we want to destroy, defund Eurocentric, the church structure and social structure. Do we just leave it open? Do we just leave a void, or do we fill it with an Afrocentric structure? What are we doing if we dismantle, if we defund, if we destroy these things? What are we going to fill it with? And so let me begin with you, Jamel. What are we going to do? Do we just tear these things down and put nothing up? Or are we going to put something up in its place? And what do we put up? Do we tear down white theology? What do we put up? Racism. Talk to me.
I don't even know what to say to that. Like, white theology and black theology is not, neither of those are my theology that I understand. Those are, and dealing with social reforms and those type of issues. Are you talking about the economy? Are we economists? There's a lot that you said. So it's like, they always ask me, do you want the devil in pink or the devil in blue? I will have to look at each situation and compare it with what I know with the Bible. If something supports it, then I can go with it. If it doesn't, then I can't. Even if it's half and half, I have to say no. Even if it's 99 and one little bit is bad, I have to say no. We're not here to reform every government on earth. We're not here to do all those aspects. That's not the role that we have. That's not the primary focus of a religious group. I'm not here to overthrow governments or overthrow the police or overthrow whatever. That's not the role that the church has. Maybe I'm reaching. Maybe I'm stretching it far beyond what everyone is saying. Maybe I'm going too far. But it sounds like it's some sort of economic transformation, like socialism or something. I don't want to use that word, but that's what it sounds like. And I don't think that's a religious issue. So as far as the church doing it, that aspect of it, I'm not really in favor, but maybe I'm not understanding the question correctly.
No, you're okay. We may come back to you. Jamaica, talk to me. If we're going to dismantle these things, as a sociologist, again, I'm reading, I'm looking at what's going on around me, and I'm hearing people say this white theology is destroying our church. We need to tear it down. But what do we replace it with? We know that racism is an issue, but are we going to replace racism with colorism or classism or nationalism? Are we going to remove this Eurocentric church and social structure? Do we replace it with an Afrocentric structure? Who now gets, the primary place and time? Talk to me, Jamaica.
So I think that you can't replace something with nothing, as you said. I do think that we do need to allow more people in the room that are making the rules, people of color that are making the rules as to, I guess, how we praise or how we work, how we operate our day-to-day lives. We definitely need to get back into the Bible, because somewhere along the line we messed up and we have these systems now. Somewhere along the line, and I'm not sure where, but someone got it confused, and now here we are. So we need to now take a look and say, this is what has happened so far, and it does require us to take a look back and say, this is how we messed up, and we have to address that. We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to say, I was wrong, because not only did I decide to continue to live this way or continue to believe in this thing or in this structure, and I knew it was wrong because my parents did it as well, so it was comfortable for me to continue doing this thing. We have to break it down, because we see it in when people are like talking about defunding the police as well. Like, you can't, I don't, that's not necessarily like something I agree with, So it's just, it's kind of like finding a way that it's hard to make all parties accept this new thing. But, oh, are you speaking? I can't hear you. Okay. But it's something that we need to work on as a people. I do think there's definitely things wrong with saying, like, for example, like I just brought up defunding the police, but I do believe like their training systems might need to be changed. For example, there's no reason why a lawyer has to go to school for 3 years. They don't graduate with a certificate or a license to carry a gun. But a police officer can train for 6 months in an academy and they're licensed. So and they know, and lawyers know the law. So it's hard. It's really about breaking down the system and really just addressing that you were wrong. And that's very hard for a lot of people to admit that they were wrong and to say, okay, now we need to change it. So I think once we get there, once we can have that conversation without people feeling offense, and not in a place of I'm calling you out but I want to fix this problem, then no changes can really be made until we get there.
Okay. Pastor Marshall, let's go to you very quickly. If we're dismantling, we're tearing down, we're defunding, what are we replacing these things with?
Well, I think first of all, like the word dismantling and defunding, words have meaning. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make is in some senses, we don't have to necessarily tear down. We can enhance as well. We can build up. And then in some cases, there is a need to dismantle. I think, as Jamaica said, all of these individuals who are in a position to have a conversation need to come together, have a conversation in accordance to the issue that's being addressed, and do what's in the best interest of the people instead of using their platform as a means of solely feeding into what their agenda is.
Okay. All right. Yes or no question very quickly as we move to our the final question that I have and prepare to wrap up with final statements, etc. If we do dismantle, and I hear you, Pastor Marshall, that these words have true meaning. We defund, we destroy, we dismantle. Is it possible that we should consider replacing all of these systems, all of these isms with a Christ-centric system?
No.
Is that the way to go?
No.
No, a Christ-centric system is not the system? Okay, all right. Jamel? All right, you guys are muted, and I'm not sure why.
No,
right.
I don't think that should be how the government is run.
Okay, all right. Jamiki, is the Christ-centric system the system that we need to put in place?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right, very good. Let's go to the last and final question as we prepare to wrap up. You guys may not even have been around or know who Rodney King is. And we're now talking about the how. And I think Rodney King was 1991, if I remember the date correctly. So that's almost 30 years ago. It was 91 or 2? 92. And so almost 30 years ago. And so here we are 28 years later. And the complaint is that as African Americans, even as a church of African Americans, etc., as a nation of African Americans, we are being somewhat reactive and not proactive. Because here we are. I'm going to tell you, Rodney King from 1992 to what I saw in Minneapolis with the truck driver being pulled out of his truck, etc., looked very similar to what happened in 1992 with Rodney King. Here we are, almost 30 years later, and we're still marching. We're still protesting. And it seems like we may not have made much progress. And so my question to you this afternoon as we prepare to wrap up, are we continuing to be reactive, and when do we get to the point of being proactive? Proactive meaning that we have a plan, we have a strategy, and we have a leader. Tell me a little bit about that. Are we being reactive, and do we need to be more proactive? Who is our leader? Where is the strategy? Where is the plan? Let's begin with you, Jamel.
Racism is not black people's fault. What do you mean? It's not. How you can say, are you being proactive? If someone does something wrong to me, how am I going to be proactive against that? I have to react to that. I can't jump to conclusions ahead of time. I have to wait till you do something wrong and then address the issue. What's happening in someone else's heart and their mind is not because of me. I'm not to blame for that. I'm not responsible for that. If someone does something wrong, if I do something wrong to you, that's on me. And I have to be responsible. I have to deal with that. You shouldn't even have to deal with it, to be honest. So I don't know about the issue of not being, only acting reactively. I think that is the way nature works, human nature works, or the way the laws work. I can't punish you before you commit a crime.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a fair question really to ask, but yeah, I don't know.
The thing is, we know that racism exists. We know that injustice exists, and it existed since Rodney King 28 years ago, and it existed before Rodney King another 28 years before.
Yes.
What have we done as a society? How are we helping? What are the plans? Who are the leaders? And that's what I'm asking, because we're saying in the next 30 years, are we going to sit around and wait to be reactive again, Jamel?
You have to. Listen, there's always going to be a different way to do something wrong. We have laws. There's racism. Then there's a law to stop that element of it. And then there's a new way to do it. And then there's a law to stop a new way to do it. It's a cycle that goes to issue different races. You're not going to change people's heart like that. You're going to always have to react. You're always going to have to change and adapt. That's part of life. It's not.
All right.
It's not,
all right. Jamiki, talk to me. What are we doing? Are we being reactive, not being proactive? Where is the strategy? Who is our leader? Where is the plan?
So I think we're doing both. I think we are reacting. We might not be reacting in the best way, but we're angry. I think we're also being proactive because there are organizations that are now stepping forward and trying to be a voice of unity. They are creating plans. And all it takes is really a click. I know I was having a conversation about the Black Lives Matter movement, and me personally, I had no clue who was in charge of that movement at all. I would always see people donating money and all of that into these organizations, but I had no clue where the money was actually going. And that was on me because I didn't take time to do the research and I didn't take time to find out who those people are. So that's not to blame the organization at all. But all it takes is literally a click online. We have access, Wi-Fi is everywhere in the day and age that we live in, and we can find that information, who's leading the charge. I do think we're reacting. I don't think we are necessarily reacting in a right way, but then again, there is no right way to react. When you turn, like I said, when you turn on the news or you scroll on any form of social media, and every other post, you have to physically see this person being killed by having a knee pressed on their neck or someone being hung. And this is just regular on our timelines, and our bodies aren't wired to see that all the time. We're not supposed to see those things all the time. Years ago, that would have been blocked. As soon as it was posted online, it would have been taken down. They would have asked for permission, asked how old you are to see this because it's harmful. And they're no longer doing that. But at the same time, I think it's helpful because people are now seeing it. People that have before been strong supporters of all lives matter instead of just Black Lives Matter, they're now seeing these things and they're like, okay, I get it. So it's a little bit of both. It's kind of trying at this point, I believe it's trying to find a common ground for both, but I kind of agree with Fox. Like you can't plan for that. Like if I do know history repeats itself, and I feel like we can say that, yes, this will happen again. We don't know how it will happen again, but we can say it will happen again. But I think that's what the organizations are there for, not to prevent necessarily those things from happening again. But when they do happen, they're supposed to be the people that we look to say, okay, what do we do next?
All right, thank you. Pastor Marshall, talk to me a little bit quickly here. Are we reactive? Do we need to be more proactive? Who is our leader? Where is the strategy? Where is the plan? We're talking about defining the decade.
When it's all said and done, you look at Ahmaud Arbery, you look at Breonna Taylor, you look at George Floyd, and the number of people who have been the victims of police brutality. We are reacting. But an example that I'll give you to further qualify my statement is that, and I think Jamel was trying to say it, when you consider the situation that we're in concerning the pandemic, we're realizing that you couldn't plan and have prepared for this. This is something that just happened, and we have to adapt and adjust to the situation that we're in. And I think the same can be said about what we're doing right now, kind of, because every situation is different and it will call for us to respond in accordance to what's taking place. We can organize, we can strategize, we can mobilize, but we have to know what it is that we're addressing first before we can proactively become engaged in the cause. As Jamiki said, it takes us doing our homework, doing our due diligence, educating ourselves, making sure that our principles are in line with what that individual organization is promoting, that we're deciding to align ourselves with, et cetera, before we engage in the work. And sometimes these organizations may not holistically agree with everything that we believe in as Adventists or as Christians, but there is a commonality sometimes that will cause us to stand up and fight with them for the same thing, because we share the same or a similar value. So when it's all said and done, we cannot be so close-minded that we can't work with someone who has something in common with us. And at the same time, we do need to make sure that we are informed, because as Al Sharpton said, you can't be effective if you're not informed.
All right. And so you mentioned Al Sharpton, and so let me go to my final question before I give each of you an opportunity to give your final thoughts. Who is our leader? The Bible talks about the people, if you don't have vision, my people perish for a lack of vision. And so leadership usually give a people vision, and they give them direction. They give them a plan. And so a plan for me, for us to be able to deal with the systemic racism that we're dealing with in our society, I need someone who's going to define the problem for me adequately, going to give me some action steps, going to give me some implementation guidelines, a monitoring component to that, an evaluation component, and then finally some sustainability. Can we sustain this plan? Who is the leader that's given that plan? Is that plan available someplace? Is it Al Sharpton? Is it Jesse Jackson? I'm aging myself now. Is it LeBron? Is it Candace Owen? Talk to me. Who is this leader that we're looking to put this plan in place, this strategy that can help us so that by 2030, when we talk about defining this decade, we're not at the same point. Here I am, 28, almost 30 years later, dealing with the same situation that I dealt with Rodney King in 1992. Do we have a leader? Who is that leader? Where is the plan? Jamiki.
I'm not sure we have that leader, to be very honest with you. Right now, all I can say is we need to do the research ourselves, because to be quite honest, we still might not necessarily know why we're fighting. We know that we're seeing these little instances that we're seeing on our Instagrams and on our Facebook and on all of our feeds. We know that we're seeing those things, but do we know the background? Do we know why it's happening? And then you have to do the research, and it requires you going further back than just slavery, further back than just 400 years ago. We need to do the work. And right now we're not doing the work. This is just how I feel personally. I feel like we're allowing the organizations to do the work on our behalf. And we're kind of just taking what they say as law at this point. And we need to not. We need to do the work.
All right, Pastor Marshall, let me go to you. Do we have a leader? Is the leader, is he or she available to us? Where is this plan?
I don't think we have a leader right now. And this is why history is so important, because history sets precedents up for us that allow us to implement strategies that were used in the past and even build on them so that they can be effective. During the the March on Selma for the right for Black people to vote, um, Martin Luther King called everyone to where he was. And right now we're not seeing that. As Jamiki said, we are all in our own cul-de-sacs and we are addressing those issues on social media, et cetera, as they're happening. But there is not one person who has been designated like a Moses, for lack of a better term, to lead the people out of the wilderness and into the promised land. And from a Christian standpoint, the leader must be called by God. And the leader must have people around him who share the same values, understand the vision, and are willing to implement the elements necessary to bring that mission to its completion. And I think the last thing that we need to consider is that this is not something that is going to happen overnight. It's something that is going to have to take place gradually, and we are just going to have to continue to be persistent as we work toward the change that we want to see implemented in our world. And this is why the church is so critical, because the church is the platform where all parties can be heard. The church doesn't take one side or another side. The church takes the side of justice and should create that platform where people have an opportunity to voice their concerns, collaborate, and work together to bring about the change that they'd like to see in the system.
All right, before we go to our closing comments, Jamel, let me give you a chance to respond. Do we have a leader? Is there a leader out here that's going to put this action plan in place for us, give us some monitoring, evaluation, sustainability plan? Where is this leader? Is he or she out there? Do we need one? Is one necessary? Talk to me.
We don't have leaders anymore in this world. We have grassroots movements. We have social media cliques,
influencers.
Influencers. The Arab Spring, they didn't have a leader and they overthrew their governments. Hong Kong protests, they don't have leaders. Right now, the country is being run by the governors, like 55 governors with the 5 territories. And leadership it's almost a thing of the past at this point. So it's kind of, at this point in time, there's no leadership generally across the board in anything.
Okay, all right. Thank you. This has been great. I wish we had more time. And so at this point, I'm going to begin with Jamiki, asking you just to give us just a 30 seconds to a minute, your closing thoughts as we deal with this topic, defining the decade 2020 to 2030. Give us your closing comments.
Okay. I believe that we need to get back to our roots. We need to put Christ first. We need to read our Bible and invest in us, our people. I believe that we don't need to stay silent when we have the power to speak up, because that's only doing a disservice to ourselves and our people. I have nothing but love and faith in us, and I'd love to see us make a movement. I'd love to see us be on the same page. But yeah, we really just need to return to our faith in our Bible, not break everything down, but be able to just build a better version of what has not been working.
All right. Jamel, let me go to you.
Closing thoughts.
Yes.
We do need to speak out when we see things that are wrong. We do need to help people physically, and with the ultimate goal to bring them to Christ, which is the ultimate solution. He's the ultimate goal. A warning I would say is also be very careful when you see churches influencing politics. It doesn't end well. Historically, it hasn't ended well. So we have to find a balance. How do we help people without going too far and controlling governments?
All right. Pastor Marshall, your closing thoughts?
I think the decade started in such a way that it created a platform for leaders to emerge. Just as much as we have movements need leaders. And when it's all said and done, I think the leaders that will emerge are young people. I think that we just need to stop quenching their innovative methods and their imagination as they plan to make some kind of change. A lot of the times, our young people hear the phrase, we don't do this here, or we don't operate that way, and it discourages them. I think we need to let them, as long as it doesn't stray from principle, we need to give them the room to exercise that creativity in the way that God has given them. And if you don't mind, if you could just give me 30 more seconds to give a quick example. When we look at David prior to him being king, and he's standing up to fight against Goliath, the conventional way to fight that fight is with armor. So Saul tells him, use my armor. But David said, no, that's not the way that I operate. I can't do it this way. I haven't tried these things. And as a result, Saul gives him the leeway to use the sling. And as a result, he is just as successful with the sling as a soldier is with his armor. So we have to give our young people the room to step up, stand out, and do their thing in their way, as long as it doesn't stray from the principles that God has called us to live out.
Amen. Thank you. I want to thank each of you for your thoughtful comments this afternoon as we look at this most important topic for us. As we have entered, we're halfway through the first year of this decade. So we have 9 years left. And so it's important for us as young people, and I've tried to avoid giving most of my opinion as I ask the questions this afternoon. But the one thing I do want to leave with us, and a lot of individuals on their comments have been mentioning it, that God is looking for a change in our hearts and not just in our behavior. And so I think as Christians, that must be our role, to do whatever we can to change individuals' hearts. I can change your behavior and have you put up a black screen and have you play the national anthem, the Black national anthem, and have you, say lovely and great things about me as a nation, as a community, as an organization, etc. But if I haven't changed your heart, then I haven't changed much. And so I would encourage us, as we continue to fight for social justice and social equality in our society as young individuals, I encourage you to do whatever you can in this next decade to define it, 2020, 2030, over these next 9.5 years, to do your best to change the hearts of individuals and not just to change their behavior. And so with that, we're going to sign off. We're about 15 minutes over our time, but we want to thank each and every one of you. Thank those of you who participated and was listening in. And we look forward to joining the Hanson Place Youth Ministries Department for another excellent program next week. Thank you for listening, and we'll say goodbye to each and every one of you at this time.